Welcome to another reading of Mehera-Meher, page 456, which is a nice picture of Baba in a little tent at Rahuri, 1937. Chapter 93, Gypsy Life. On 12 December 1949, Meher Baba, Erich, Dawn, and the four women left Sarnath in the early morning, walking northward. Mani noted in her diary, mad rush and hurry as ever. In honor of the first day of gypsy life, the women wore their blue cotton saris, while Mera remembered Baba with his fair skin looked so beautiful in his white robe and green turban. An hour and a half later, the men companions, dressed similarly in white robes and green turbans, followed with the caravan and menagerie of animals, like a walking Noah's Ark. Babadas went first, holding the reins and walking beside the white horse, which was never called any other name than that. Bola Ram, the camel, pulled a cart driven by Baidul. Two bullocks pulled a cart driven by Vishnu. Then came Pendu, driving the caravan pulled by the English bull, Raja, and an Indian bull, also never named. And behind it came the two cows with their calves and the two donkeys. So one bullock from the east and one from the west pulled the New Life caravan, Mera observed. The unique scene was witnessed only by Doctors Nath and Kare and their families, standing at a distance, and by Padre, sitting at a corner cafe. Padre found the procession so majestic that his fingers itched for his camera to record it for posterity. But Baba had forbidden him to take any photographs. Padre told Mani later that the picture of them setting out was nonetheless indelibly imprinted on his mind. You could not have known it because you were in it, but it was really out of this world, a most wondrous sight that greeted my eyes as I silently watched that long procession passing by while the dawn was still young. Mani said, our camel of the new life had a lovely Persian silver bell round its neck. The bell of the camel is mentioned in the verses of Hafiz, the perfect master whose poetry Baba loved so much. The bell worn by the leading camel of a caravan is symbolic of progress. It tolls to remind a caravan which has halted at an oasis and is unwilling to move on in the desert again. Move on. This is not your destination. Forward, forward. And the sidebar says, the camel bell had been brought from Iran by Meherji and was used later at Meherzad. After Baba dropped the body, Aloba rang it in the evenings to signal the pilgrims that it was time to leave. The women stopped first at a mango orchard 4 miles outside Shivpur, and the two groups rendezvoused in the town later in the morning. They then began walking the 38 miles to Jaunpur, which would take them 3 days. The lovely symbolic camel bell made so much noise, however, that whenever they passed through villages, children ran for a look. Mani recalled, One day, when our procession stopped somewhere by the roadside, Baidul left the camel cart and walked over to talk with some of the other companions. Before you knew it, there was a crowd of delighted children round the cart, admiring the camel. What happened next, we don't know, but the camel took fright and ran. He was running along the street, his bell clanging away, the cart hurtling behind, Baidul shouting and running after, and the children racing in the rear. The townspeople, wondering what the tumult was about, joined in the chase. Everybody was running and shouting, and somehow Baidul at last managed to catch up with the camel and coaxed him back to where Baba and we were waiting. The animals were a continual nuisance and a headache to the men. Ghani and Gustaji had charge of the two donkeys, who every few minutes refused to move forward. Ghani grew tired trying to coax the stubborn asses forward. Similarly, Nilu and Sadashiv had a rough time handling the cows, and Nilu, in the end, had to carry one calf across his shoulders. As for the white horse, Donkin exclaimed later, "He's not a horse, he's a devil." As Mani reported, when it was feeding time and Don held the bag before it, the horse would eat until there was just a little left. When he knew there were only a few munches left, with his head still down in the food bag and eating the last remnant, he would start running, turning his behind towards Don, getting ready to kick. Moreover, the English bull was strong, but would not walk as fast as the Indian bull. One day, a car driven by an Englishman drove up behind the caravan, honking for it to move out of the way. The man even leaned out the window and yelled, "Hey, pull those bulls over!" "Sir," said Murley, one of the companions who was driving that day, "this is an English bull. Perhaps he'll understand you better than he understands me." Mani noted, all during our life with Baba, it was clear that Baba not only worked on all levels, but worked with and through all of creation, all creatures. In the new life, along with the men and women, were included the animals in the company of Baba. Whoops, I hit the wrong button. Hang on, we're almost there. But despite the novelty of the animals and their caravan and the picturesque dress of the companions, Mani also noted that it was Baba who was the real focus of attention. When we were on the road walking, mile after weary mile, sometimes passing through villages and towns on the way, or walking on lonely stretches of country roads, passers-by would somehow not be unduly distracted by the rest of the party in robes and turbans. In parentheses, it says, Indians are tolerant of people's modes of dress. But when their eyes fell on Baba, they would stop their chatting and stand quite still, just looking at Baba as he went by, then turn round and follow him with their eyes until he was out of sight. Said Mera adoringly, "Baba looked like an emperor." In Sarnath, it had been decided that most of the baggage should be sent to Dehradun by freight train, so it would not have to be carried on the foot journey. But this required raising an additional sum of money. Baba suggested that everyone donate his or her wristwatch to be sold. Don, Pendu, and Adi were often required to run errands for which they would need their watches to be punctual, so they were allowed to keep theirs. 12 watches were collected from the rest of the companions, including one from the women. This was perhaps an indication that in the new life, as Erich observed, we would have to live in the now, as Baba called it. We should not give a thought to the past, present, or future. Only concentrate on living with him as his companion. Erich's duty on the journey was to be with Baba, so he walked by Baba's side, followed by the four women, and then by the rest of the companions, with the animals and carts. Baba started off in the early hours of the morning, Erich recalled. It was beautiful at that time, and I felt as if I were the only free person in the whole world. Nothing mattered to me except to be by the side of the God Man, whom we were not to think of as the God Man, but as our companion. It was a real delight. Moreover, when they were on the road, Erich often did the begging for the morning meal. And Erich says this: in the distance, Baba would point to smoke settling, as it does early in the morning, and say, "Look now, there's a fire there, and breakfast is being prepared for us." Then he would stop and ask me to cross the fields and beg something for breakfast. I would leave Baba's side and rush through the fields, often a long distance. Baba's instructions were that after reaching the village and having begged for food, I was again to join him at some distance along the road, because Baba wouldn't stop the journey for the sake of my begging. He went on ahead, and I had to catch up with him. You can imagine the speed with which I had to go, and my concentration on begging for the food for Baba and the women. During the begging, I kept in mind a hint from a story that was narrated by Upasani Maharaj. He advised us that if ever we had to beg for food, we should not go to the front door, but to the back, because women have softer hearts. If you go to the front door, the menfolk will drive you away. So go behind, go to the kitchen, and approach the women. That hint of Upasani Maharaj I remembered. One very touching incident comes to mind. Usually, when Baba sent me to a village to beg for food, I would have to go from hut to hut. At one, only a little bread might be offered to me, and no vegetables. And so I would have to approach the next hut, and the next, until I had received that sufficient quantity for a couple of morsels each. One day, as on so many others, I went at Baba's orders to start begging in a village for our breakfast. The first hut I went to was the home of an old woman. As I saw her lying there, I shouted loudly, "Ma, Biksha, give me something to eat." She started and said, "Wait, Wait, my son, wait! I will give you something. And she started opening some boxes inside her hut. Not a single box had anything in it. She told me to wait at her hut and went out to beg for my sake. As she made the rounds of the homes in her street, they gave her a good quantity of food, and then she brought it to me. Freshly cooked bakri, which are millet chapatis, vegetables, and some chutney. She gave it to me and sent me on. She wouldn't permit me to leave empty handed, you see. I still remember that old lady who went out to beg for the sake of the God man who had sent me to beg for him. Baba collected all that I had brought, and with his own hands he divided it, giving each of us two morsels for the morning, fresh bread, fresh vegetables, and distributed by the God man. Our appetites were completely satisfied. On occasion, there would be sugar cane sticks in addition, distributed as dessert. Baba handed a piece to each of us. We ate it, and then we moved on again. That's the end of Eric's quote. In contrast, Mani reported a time when Kaka and Nilu were sent out. It was so cold at this time that they put on everything they had, an old sweater, a quilt coat that somebody had given in Biksha on the way, and on top of it all, the robe. Neither Kaka nor Nilu was slim to begin with. They were healthy looking, robust, rotund, almost fat, you might say. And after they had completed their dress, they looked really round and fat. When they went to ask for food in the town, a man came out, gave one angry look at them, and said, You! You look like wrestlers, and you certainly don't look underfed. And yet you're begging for your food? What's the matter with you? Why don't you go get jobs? You'd make good wrestlers. But you but you certainly make bad mendicants. You should be ashamed of yourselves. And so on, and so on. Of course, they came away empty handed. Kaka took it very lightly, but Nilu, for a Brahmin to go out and beg is hard enough, especially when he thought of his family tree and traditions and so on. Now he was grumbling. What insults we receive! It didn't matter personally to Nilu, but there was another Hindu who would say that to him, a Brahmin, and all because he was begging for Baba's sake. Erich noted, the problem of begging in a city was much more difficult than in the villages because these so called civilized people were a bit hard on mendicants and pilgrims. They didn't want to part with the bounties they had been given by God or that they had earned by God's grace. But the villagers were very innocent and they gave freely with great love. Mani concluded, you know, in the Hindu tradition, they're enjoined in scriptures always to give food to a person who comes to their door, never to refuse. For who knows? that someone might be Ram himself in the form of a man, God in the form of a man. So, even though hundreds of years pass between the Avatar's comings, you give alms without worrying whether the mendicant or sadhu is real or false. No matter what, never refuse, because you never know who may be at your door one day. Along with Baba's and the women's beddings, some foodstuffs had been kept in the caravan, and Kaka often drove it ahead to begin preparing their evening meal at a prearranged resting place. Although they carried enough supplies to last them until the end of December, nevertheless, at every stop, Baba sent out some of the men to beg. From Sarnath, the first night on the road was spent in a schoolyard in Shivpur. And Meheru recalled what camping in the new life was like. We'd be walking and walking, and at last we got to the place. It was usually a nice orchard with a well and water. As soon as we camped, our caravan was brought to us. We were happy to get to our destination, relax, and wash our feet and hands. But before we realized it, invariably there was a crowd of people around us, so we could not relax. We were like a circus come to town. Though we might be far from the nearest village, somehow these people got the news, and nearly the whole village came and crowded around. You can imagine it. How can you relax or feel at home, yet you must not get angry with them? We were tired. We wanted to relax, to wash our feet. We wanted to attend to nature. We wanted to put the mats on the ground for resting. We wanted to draw water for our needs. There was much to do, and yet here was this crowd watching us. We felt like saying, "Now go away." But all the people were smiling, and we too had to smile. They wanted to see the caravan. What new kind of carriage is this? It looks like a bus, and the wheels are like a motor car, and yet bullocks are drawing it. Not even horses. They were very surprised. They had never seen anything like that. They all bent down and looked at the wheels here and there, inspecting everything. Then they stood round, smiling very happily. They had never seen people like us in that part of India. They were all Hindus, and we were wearing a new kind of attire. The Mandali were all in white robes with green turbans, looking like some sort of regiment. The villagers couldn't make out who we were, so they asked, and we told them we were going to Haridwar. Then they felt very happy. "You are going on a pilgrimage to Haridwar," and they were greatly impressed. Mera added, "There was never running water. It had to be brought from a well. The men brought it for us halfway to Goher, and Goher brought it on in two little pails and put it in the samovar. Then we all washed our faces and hands and made ready for Baba's tea. But there was always the crowd standing about, men and women, young and old, all standing around in a big circle, watching us. We didn't know what to do. We couldn't feel at home because there were so many people watching us. What to do? We said to them, now we are going to have tea. Our tea is going to come. They replied, yes, good, have tea. And they remained standing there to watch us have our tea. When the tea came, we would think, if Baba comes, how uncomfortable he will feel with such a crowd watching. Then Goher said to them, but without getting angry or irritated or speaking tersely, Namaste, Namaste, just as we would say Jai Baba. It means greetings. So she said, Namaste, now you must go. Our men companions are over there. All the men should go to the men. It's all right if the women stay. We are all women here. What is there for the men to stand around here for? So the men agreed. Ah, yes, that is true. And they all walked off. It was good that we thought of that idea. After that, whenever the village men came round, we let them stay for a few minutes to see the caravan, and then told them to go to the men companions' side. The women stayed around us, wanting to talk to us about this and that. Of course, we were not in the mood to talk. We wanted to rest and have tea because we've been walking since morning. It was very funny. I can tell you, with so many people coming and going, it was very inconvenient not to have a private place, even to do one's private business. It was very uncomfortable, but we could not get upset with them. In the meantime, the men were in another part of the orchard with the animals. Kaka was cooking, and Baba was walking back and forth. Before the men companions could relax, they had to tend to the animals. The camel cart carried food for the animals, Mani explained. Hay, fodder, whatever. If there wasn't the right kind of fodder to be had, they had to chop something up, Mehera said. Baidul and others. I don't know who they were because we couldn't see them properly. Chopped up sugarcane tops. After they had given food to the animals, they had to bring them drinking water and make them comfortable. Only then could the Mandali attend to themselves. It was very hard on them. In the new life, Baba gave great importance to looking after the animals. Mani continued. The Mandali were more concerned with looking after them than with themselves. Early in the morning at 2:30 or 3 a.m., in the bitter cold of northern India, we saw the men in the distance chopping up fodder by lamplight for the camel, cows, horse, and donkeys. After the animals were fed, the Banarsi cow had to be milked, and Mani noted. Sometimes the men had time to snatch a cup of tea, sometimes not. As soon as they finished, we would be off on our walking. At times, the men even missed their morning cup of tea. Looking after the animals was given first preference over their tea. Baba had given the men rough blankets, two each, just as he had the women, but the men had to sleep out in the open. Baba slept under a tent, Mehera recalled. A very small tent meant only for one or two people. It had belonged to Narina and Elizabeth. They had left it behind in Mehrabad. It wasn't a well insulated tent, so it was just as cold inside the tent as outside. Baba must have wanted it for privacy only. And Sidebar said, Norina and Elizabeth had used this tent when they were traveling in the summertime in America, camping out in search of a suitable site for a center. Erich noted, the tent was so perfect and beautifully made that at the entry there were flaps fitted with a zipper, so there would be ventilation and no mosquitoes. Once during our travels up in the north, Monty said, it rained so hard during the night that the rain came right through the little tent. Erich kept watch outside, sitting under an umbrella. The men who were sleeping in the open, of course, were drenched through. The women had more protection in their caravan, but not much more comfort. Mehera said, we never had to tolerate so much cold in winter. Going towards the north is going towards the Himalayas, and the Himalayas then were covered with snow. You could see the snow-capped mountains from certain points as we went further north. It was so cold that Baba gave us women the caravan to sleep in. There were three benches in it, like three seats, and we longed to go inside because it was so cold outside. As it grew dusk, there were stars in the sky and the outlines of the trees, but no roof over our heads. We waited out in the open until it was dark and time to go to bed. Then we got inside the caravan. We shut the windows and pulled the curtains down, leaving a slight crack for fresh air, and settled down for the night. When Goher came, she was the fourth, and as she had no seat to sleep on, she had to lie on the floor. But she was quite happy, as long as she was under a roof and warm. The Mandali were not warm. Many of them could not sleep at all because it was so cold under the stars. It rained sometimes. When they could not get warm, some stood and stamped their feet or tried to get a fire going. But you see, it was Baba who gave them the strength and also the help to go through with the new life. He sustained us all. Picture of Baba and Mehera all bundled up in overcoats and sweaters. Whoops, hit the wrong key again, sorry. The caption says, Mehera serving Baba tea, Blue Bus Journey 1938-39. Mm-hmm. So that's way back. Chapter 94, Cold Dawn. During the gypsy life, when Meher Baba knocked on the door of the caravan at 3:45 a.m., Goher unlocked the door and stepped out first. She was already completely dressed. After Goher rolled up her bedding on the floor, Meramani and Meru got down because they too slept in their clothes for warmth. They were also semi dressed. Baba was wearing warm clothes and a scarf, and the women put on their coats and bundled up. But it was so cold that they had difficulty buttoning the buttons. Their fingers were blue, stiff and numb from the cold. Although they hesitated to get out from under their nice warm blankets, it was a rare opportunity to be with Baba in the moonlight. When we jumped out of the caravan, Mara recalled, the stars were still out. It was terrifically cold. No roof over our head. Just jump down, put on our jackets, and wash our face with ice cold water. You couldn't even gargle with it. The women did not want Baba to have to wash his face and shave with such cold water. So whenever they reached a camping spot, they found three big stones on which to keep a large vessel of water by the fire. If Baba wanted to bathe, they heated the hot water in it twice. The sidebar says the large vessel was carried inside the caravan. Tied onto the front of the caravan were a few pieces of wood, a small pail, and a samovar. Sometimes, when they were staying at a traveler's bungalow where there was no electricity, Meru heated the water overnight in the pail over a tiny kerosene lantern. In the morning, Meru lit a fire with kindling to heat the water until it was lukewarm. Baba shaved daily during the new life, always using a straight razor and soap. Mara poured water over his hands while he washed. In the dark, Meru said, everyone gravitated to the fire for warmth till there was enough light to pack up camp. Mera and Meru rolled up Baba's bedding and stored it with the women's in the caravan. Our hands swelled in the bitter cold, Mera remembered, making it difficult to tie Baba's bedding. We put the straps around it, but after we left, Erich came and tightened the straps and loaded it into the caravan because we couldn't lift it. Our own beddings were smaller, and Meru rolled them up. After we had our tea, Baba went to the mandali. Erich folded up Baba's little tent and stowed it also. Being a forested area, they had to be careful when going to the toilet in the woods, as snakes were everywhere. Dim kerosene lanterns were their only source of light. When they had finished brushing their teeth and packing their satchels, Mara climbed back inside the caravan. The winter was too severe. I put a little cloth on my lap and put the little lantern on the floor near my legs to make them feel warm. After I got them warm a bit, we had to walk. They started early without breakfast, or after a very meager breakfast of leftover chapati or bakri received in biksha, plus 2 cups of hot tea to wake them up and warm them. There was nothing very filling, such as cream or butter, but even for this much we were grateful, Mara related. though we had to walk for miles with nothing substantial. Still, it was nice to see Baba walking in front of us. Gustaji had charge of the donkeys, which caused him a lot of trouble. He complained to Baba that first morning, so Baba said that the women would look after the donkeys from then on. Mehera stated, "It was my idea to have the two donkeys. Gustaji and the other men had been making two mistakes. They had tried to pull the donkeys instead of driving them from behind. We were collecting branches along the way as fuel, and I suggested tying it on the donkeys' backs. When we did this, the donkeys took off as if they were used to having a load on their backs. When they were free, they thought they were supposed to relax. We saw that Gustaji wasn't caring for them correctly and asked Baba whether we could look after them. We named them Saku and Thaku. Mani and I sewed the cotton mats from our bedding to be sacks on their backs. We put the twigs to heat the water for Baba in the donkey's sacks. In parentheses, says we couldn't buy wood. Along with the twigs we collected, we put our satchels too in the sacks. When we camped, we let the donkeys loose to graze. But the women also experienced some difficulty in getting Saku and Thaku to keep up. Invariably, Mani and Meru lagged behind with the donkeys, and Baba often had to signal them to hurry up. Whenever a bus went by, Mani yelled and tweaked the donkeys' tails, and they galloped ahead. Once they even passed Baba. When they entered villages, sometimes the villagers mistook them for wandering peddlers and asked, "Anything to sell?" When the women said no, the villagers scolded. "Just look at that heavy weight on those poor animals. Don't load the donkeys so much. You must care for them properly." This was ironic. It was just such comments that Mehera and Mani had made so often to others. To avoid such situations, once, when they missed a turn while walking and had to double back through a town, it was already very late and the streetlights had been turned on. Baba told the women to sit inside the caravan until they were on the outskirts again. Baba too sat with them. During that time, Erich took charge of the donkeys. The women watched as he resorted to shouting and raising two big sticks to make the donkeys move through the town before the women took over again. When they started off in the morning, usually Baba and Erich were in the lead, Mehera and Goher behind them, and Mani and Meru further back with the donkeys. The men companions and animals brought up the rear, some distance behind. When Baba wanted to speak with the women, Erich walked ahead so that the women could approach Baba. Miles and miles of quiet roads and forests were passed, along with picturesque green fields of winter wheat, sugarcane, and mustard with its lovely yellow flowers. The sidebar says, mustard oil is much used in North India, both for cooking and as a body rub to keep warm. When we got up early and walked with Baba, Mani recalled wistfully, it seemed like another planet. It felt as if there was nobody else on Earth. Baba started walking at such unearthly hours in the morning. It was quiet. Only occasionally did we see someone coming out of some hut. Otherwise, we passed only fields upon fields of mustard. By the time the sun came up and dawn broke, we had walked miles. As the women walked with the sun on their backs, they removed their outer layers of warm clothing one by one and put these too in the sacks on the donkeys' backs. As the sun rose even higher, they took out scarves or an umbrella to protect themselves from the sun, since they had no hats or solar topies. Hats would not have looked nice, Mara noted, and our arms didn't get tired as the umbrellas rested on our shoulders. The women companions' satchels, containing a toothbrush, plate, cup and saucer, handkerchief, cloth napkin, and so on, were usually kept in the caravan along with Baba's satchel, which held the same things. Baba's brass begging bowl, however, was carried along with a container of drinking water. Baba himself placed something to eat in the begging bowl, usually a sweet to give to some poor passer-by on the road who had struck his fancy after bowing down to him. If Baba himself did not wish to give the sweet to the person, he told Erich to give it, but first he bowed to Erich in proxy. And the sidebar says, sometimes when food or sweets, usually chiki, meaning peanut butter, brittle, peanut brittle, for Baba to distribute, were in the women's satchels. The satchels were carried in the sacks on the donkeys' backs. Mani recalled also that at some times people, upon learning that they were going to Haridwar, touched their feet, as if we would become their proxies and take a bit of them too on pilgrimage. It was generally a quiet road, Mara remembered. Only an occasional bus or car passed. Not many people either, as we were usually far from town. We would stop by a well and drink water. They walked until around 1 o'clock, when they stopped, perhaps in a mango orchard, where Kaka was waiting with thin dal and rice for lunch. After drinking a cup of tea, they started again and walked until evening. Many times they did not reach the prearranged destination until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, where Kaka had set up camp near a well and was already cooking their evening meal. As mentioned, Those who inquired about the unusual procession were told that they were on a pilgrimage to Haridwar, where the Kumbh Mela was to be held for the first time in 12 years. And this generally elicited bows of respect. One day, however, an embarrassing incident resulted. Baba was, as usual, ahead, with Erich, Mehera and Goher next, and then Mani and Meru dealing with the donkeys. The main group was a mile behind them, nowhere in sight. During our trek, Mani related, an empty bullock cart passed us by with just a man driving it. Seeing the four of us walking along, he said to Meru and myself, "Why don't you sit in my cart?" We said, rather virtuously, I think, "Thank you very much, but we cannot accept the lift. We're on a walking pilgrimage to Haridwar, and we have to walk. We can't take a bullock cart or anything. We have to go on foot." The man was obviously impressed. He bowed reverently to us, and we bowed back. Mani had twisted her knee the day before, getting in and out of the caravan. It was quite painful, and she was limping. Baba did not say anything, so Mani too had not complained and was gallantly trudging along. The man and his cart hadn't been gone for more than 5 minutes when there was a clap from Baba. Baba halted while Erich went ahead. Baba waited with the women until the main group arrived. Then he told Mehera, Meru, and Goher to stand aside, and he called Dawn, who was leading the white horse, to examine Mani's knee. Dawn handed off the reins to one of the men and then manipulated Mani's knee. It was so painful, Mani was close to tears. Since she could not bend her knee, Dawn advised that she not walk, at least for a few hours. Baba then told Mani to sit in the caravan and travel the rest of the way in it. As he did not want her to be alone, the other women rode with her. The caravan was used only for the four of us to sleep in when we stopped for the night. Get into the caravan? We were surprised, but that's what Baba told us to do. So we did, and it was very exciting. Meru and I sat on the seat and opened the curtains of the little windows to put our heads out. It was fun to be able to see everything without having to walk. After a while, the caravan passed a bullock cart which had just come on the main road from the other side of the village. The man driving it happened to turn and look at us, and I thought, his face seems familiar. He had a very hurt, reproachful look in his eyes, as of someone who had been deceived. Then we suddenly remembered. It was our well-wisher who had offered us a lift in his cart a short while before. Too late. Meru and I ducked our heads in, feeling quite ashamed. Baba deflated our egos just like that, Mani said as she snapped her fingers. Baba knew that Mehera would not like to ride while he walked, So he too sat inside the caravan for a while. Then something unusual happened that Mara never forgot. It was then that I kissed Baba. Baba must have looked so remarkably handsome that day that Mara had simply been unable to resist. Embracing or touching Baba was restricted during the new life, and because of that, Mara said, the new life caravan has great value to me. Mara stated also that Baba taught her how to kiss with her lips closed. In later years, when she chastely kissed Baba good night on the cheek before leaving his room, she always remembered to kiss him in this way. When asked about her feelings, what her feelings were about the hardships, the difficulties, and the cold of the new life, Mara replied, "It was a bit uncomfortable, but we were quite happy about it because Baba was with us, and that was what was most important to us. That was all that we wanted. We didn't mind going through all the difficulties because Baba was with us all the time. There were various difficulties, little discomforts, this and that, but we enjoyed it. You see, we didn't feel the discomforts. There were discomforts, but we didn't take them to heart. We felt happy going through it for Baba, being with Baba, walking with Baba." A picture of the New Life caravan where the women slept parked at Meherazad. Photo by Padre. It's cute. Baba and Mera in Meherazad, 9 January 1948. Picture by Charmian Deuce Knowles. Chapter 95, Windfall. 3 days after setting out from Sarnath, Meher Baba and the companions arrived on 15 December 1949 at Jaunpur, where accommodations had been arranged. They stayed for 5 days at a rundown estate called Kai Bag, which was under a legal dispute. The property had an extensive garden and a few broken down edifices, but the companions camped outdoors. The rooms were not swept and clean, Mara explained, so we didn't use them. We slept in the caravan, in a sort of courtyard meant for sadhus going to Rishikesh. We were outside in the courtyard all day. There was just a bit of shade. It was very cold. Jaunpur is a fertile area, Mara continued. While here, the Mandali sent a big plateful of raw radishes with the afternoon meal. Goher asked why they had sent so much. They told us that the pieces had been cut from only one radish. Such big ones grew there. They were huge, but very tender. The place was famous for them. Erich, too, remembered the radishes. They are as big as your thighs, white and longish, not round. So when you have one in your arms, it looks as though you are carrying a giant's leg. The sidebar says, Later, Mehera told so many people about the giant radishes that Baba had a Jaunpur follower send one to Meherazad. The day after they arrived, Baba decided to dispense with some of the animals, much to the relief of the men. Let the camel cart, 2 cows, and calves be sold, he stated. The reason given was that they slowed the pace. The white horse, the 2 donkeys, the 4 bullocks, the bullock cart, and the caravan were to be sent by freight train to Moradabad, their next stop. The donkeys were being kept because the women had found them useful, and the white horse presumably still had a part to play. One by one, Baba disposed of the new life animals, said Mani. Always when the work was done, the scaffolding was removed. Since the caravan was being sent ahead, Baba had a tent erected where the women could eat and sleep. But they found it too cold inside. The tent was put up the last night, Meru related. It was meant for 2 people, but the 4 of us squeezed in and spent a wakeful night inside. Money, food, transportation, and begging were topics of intense consideration in Jaunpur for the men companions. New instructions for begging were also given by Baba here. Moreover, Baba decreed that before they began the new life in earnest, there would be a quote unquote vacuum period from 22 to 31 December, when there would be a complete suspension of the ordeals that the men had to endure in the training period. They would not have to beg, wear the kafni, or do physical labor. Instead, they would have complete relaxation with plenty of good food purchased with the money they had with them. According to Erich, Baba said, "It's Mara's birthday, so we'll take the week off from our tours, hazards, and hardships." Since Mani was suffering terribly with her period and was again unable to walk, Baba decided to journey to Moradabad by train. On 21 December, the group left with the 4 women traveling first class, and Baba and some of the men in the servants' compartment. Adi Sr. had been sent ahead to arrange their accommodations, and Dawn, Pendu, and Sadashiv stayed behind to send the remaining animals and their conveyances by freight train. Appetizing food was served on the train, but Mani felt too ill to eat, and it was freezing when they arrived in Moradabad at 3 a.m. the next morning. They rested in the waiting room at the station for 3 hours, while tongas were hired. The men companions walked to a dharamshala in Ram Leela Maidan, a public grounds where pilgrims stayed. Baba and the women were driven there in the dark in an open tonga. Baba in front with the driver, Mehera and Mani shivering in the back, and Meru and Goher in another tonga with one of the men. The women stayed in the dharamshala, one large long room with 12 doors, three in each wall, encircled by a small, narrow veranda. The room was completely bare, just four cracked walls of peeling paint. It was bitterly cold, even inside. But worst of all, the floor was not quite dry. It had recently been washed, and being uneven, puddles of water had collected in the hollows. Looking at the water, Mara said, I felt even colder. When Baba came, we told him about it. Baba called the mandali to dry it while we stood outside. When they could go in, Meru quickly undid Mani's bedding and laid it out for her. She was happy to lie down, said Meru, but the draft that came from under the doors, one of which was right next to her, didn't allow her much rest. None of the doors fitted well. We didn't have beds and felt the drafts all night. It was so cold. But Mani felt better in a day or so. The Dharamshala was some distance from the city, set amidst wide open spaces with no other houses nearby. We were surrounded by lovely green fields of mustard, Mara recalled. It was very quiet there. We collected a few large stones and started to make a fire and heat some water for Baba. The caravan was parked nearby. While we were preparing the fire, a Brahmin came and, in a very rude and pompous manner, inquired what we were doing here, since the room was meant for Hindu pilgrims, and we were obviously not Hindus. The man was angry, and I told Goher to call Baba. The Mandali came and spoke with him while we stayed on the veranda. The men explained that they had gotten permission to stay there. Baba was watching from afar. During partition, Moradabad had become a hotbed of conflict between Hindus and Muslims, and Ram Leela Maidan had been declared out of bounds to Muslims. The situation in the city was still so serious that Baba even changed the names of two of the Muslim men companions to avoid conflict with the local Hindus. Ali Akbar became Aloba, and Dr. Ghani became Ganoba. Moreover, one of the men companions was put in charge of carrying a loaded pistol to prevent any intruder from harming the women. The men companions pitched Baba's small tent at one end of the women's dharamshala's porch, while the men stayed in a separate house across the dirt road. Near their house was a modest patch of garden with a well close by, where Goher went to draw water. The dharamshala had no running water, so Goher carried the water in buckets for their daily use. Once or twice the women walked over to see the garden and the well. It looked almost like a wishing well, Mani remembered. We put in a pail and drew out the water. Here they became acquainted with some who were much friendlier than the angry Brahmin. A path was nearby, Mera related, so in the morning we had a few daily passers-by. People would stop to chat. Among them were two eunuchs, so friendly and nice, who always stopped and asked how we were. We exchanged pleasantries. The grounds had a huge opening, no gate. Perhaps it had once been a Mohammedan place of worship. An Urdu poet whose pen name was Jigar lived in Moradabad at the time. Previously, whenever any singer came to perform, Baba always stopped the music and asked whether the singer knew any songs by Jigar. Although Jigar was one of Mir Baba's favorite poets, while Baba was in Moradabad during the new life, he did not allow any visitors, and Jigar never received his personal contact. But it seems that Jigar knew about Baba. Jigar led a difficult life. He was an alcoholic, and his wife deserted him because of it. Despite his drinking problem, Jigar wrote sublime ghazals. In 1960, his health ruined and on his deathbed. Jigar was contacted by a Baba lover who showed him a copy of God Speaks. Jigar reverently and tearfully touched the book to his forehead. And the sidebar says, Ali Sikandar Jigar Moradabadi, 1890 to 1960, has a special place in the history of Urdu poetry, according to Salim Kanani. Quote, a flamboyant and cavalier poet, he sat he set many a poetic meeting on fire with his style of recitation and Rindana verses. Another source states Jigar Moradabadi's contribution to Urdu poetry is unparalleled. The Urdu word jigar means liver, heart, or soul. Let me interject. The Urdu word rindana has multiple meanings, including drunk, dissolute, lewd, disorderly, licentious, profligate, rakish, or like a debauchee, and is derived from the word rind. An uninvited visitor appeared at the Dharamshala one afternoon while was resting. Whenever Baba rested, the women tried to ensure quietude. That day, the four women were talking softly together on the opposite veranda when they saw a fair-skinned sadhu walking with quick strides toward the Dharamshala. They rushed inside to avoid an encounter. The sadhu began banging his stick outside. Standing in the doorway of the porch, he called out, Ata! Ata! Which means flour. Uh, Flour, so like wheat flour. He had come seeking alms. Shh, Goher whispered. But he went on. Give me Biksha! Forgive me, she replied, Please go to the men. The sadhu looked askance, as if to say, why should I go to the men? Women do the cooking. Women always give bhiksha. Inside the room, Mehera told Mani to help Goher, as she did not want Baba to be disturbed by the commotion. He won't leave without something, Mehera said. Mani stepped outside, pointed to the men companion's house across the road, and explained that they did not do the cooking here. Our food comes from somewhere else. They told Baba about the man later, and he just smiled. Baba then went to the men's house and actually met this sadhu, whom he later revealed was a genuine seeker. A Baba lover named Harjiwan Lal became aware of the companion's pitiable plight of living mostly outdoors without proper winter clothing. As Erich recalled, when we reached Moradabad in December, it was bitterly cold and we did not know how to manage with the meager clothing we had. We were out in the open and our nails actually turned blue. We did not know what to do. There was no work, no movement, nothing. Normally, we had to walk considerable distances and were warmed by the exercise, but not now. The first night passed, and a horrible night it was, all of us shivering constantly. We had no money to buy fuel for a fire. Each of us started to wonder how the days would pass in Moradabad. The vacuum period was not starting out to be much of a relaxation, but then Baba allowed Harjiwan Lal and a few others to give some material comforts for the companions in Bhiksha. Woolen and cotton socks, blankets, sweaters, mufflers, hats, jackets, dried fruit, ghee, sweetmeats, halva, tea, preserves, fruit, dal, spices, pickles, sugar, a box of cigarettes, and 2 trunks containing some of these items. Coincidentally, it happened to be around Christmas time, as well as Mehera's birthday. When we saw all those blankets piled up, Mehera remembered, we were so happy. Baba told me to pick one first for him and one for myself. He always let me have first choice. So I chose the color I liked. There were lovely thick jackets with no sleeves. Those are vests. Pullovers, too. Baba put aside the larger sweaters for the mandali. We tried on the warm socks. Baba told us to take what we needed as there was plenty. We took 2 blankets each, and everybody grabbed them unhesitatingly, Mehera joked, as we were so cold. After we got warm things, we were comfortable. The mandali also were happy. Erch remembered. Baba commented on how, in the nick of time, we had been given these things. This is how we were saved in Moradabad by a windfall from someone inspired to send the necessary things to us at just the right moment. Erich noted, Baba's authority registered even while he moved about incognito, even without anyone mentioning his name or without his expressing any apparent wish to anyone to supply anything. Help would reach us just at the right time when it was most needed. Out of their two blankets, the women sewed a sort of sleeping bag and made one for Baba too. As Mara pointed out, although Baba was sleeping in his tent, the temperature inside the tent was the same as outside, since it was not well insulated. On 26 December, Mara's 42nd birthday was celebrated, and Goher recalled, "We garlanded Baba that day." Baba relaxed the restrictions on food and allowed each of the companions to order a meal of his choice from a nearby restaurant. Baba allowed us to have meat from outside, Mara related. Pulao, dahi, which is yogurt, and a vegetable. Their usual diet was so limited that anything special was relished. For example, Kaka would tell Gani, who was lazy, "If you don't get up, you won't get the cream from the milk," which was a special treat for him alone. As soon as Gani heard this, he sat up, washed quickly, and had tea. He did not want to forfeit his cream. And the sidebar says Mani noted in her diary, Mara's birthday had cake for breakfast, biryani in the afternoon, and Sikh kebab in the evening. Along with the warm clothing and delicious food, Baba permitted Harjiwan Lal to purchase and donate as bhiksha 2 tongas and a horse. The plan was for one of the tongas to be pulled by the white horse. A horse trainer was hired, and Baba told him, "That horse has got to be harnessed to a tonga. Teach him to pull it." Mani recounted, "It was like the taming of the shrew. The horse trainer tried all sorts of maneuvers on the horse." After a few days, the trainer told the women, "You wouldn't believe it, but this horse has once been harnessed to a tonga. He knows all the tricks. He's such a clever fellow that he's trying to pretend that he doesn't know what I mean." Mera explained, since the horse had gone unharnessed for so many days, when he was harnessed to pull the tonga in Moradabad, he didn't like it. Now he was putting on aristocratic airs. The trainer was a short, slightly built Muslim. Mani added, "A tiny little fella, so ordinary looking that if you saw him on a bus or passed him on the road, you wouldn't give him a second thought. But he was a master of horses. The way he trained that white horse. Mara and I sat out in the mornings and just watched. He did a beautiful job." Mara continued, "He went in circles with the horse, going faster and faster, round and round. While running, he jumped in the air and gave the horse a kick in its stomach, and then landed back on the ground and continued running. It was fascinating to watch. He harnessed the tonga and ran alongside the horse, but as soon as he jumped inside the tonga, the horse stopped. It was pretending that it had never pulled a tonga. Sometimes it acted right, and then again pretended. The trainer kept at it, and in the end, after a few days, he did succeed in making the horse pull the tonga. That majestic animal, Mani concluded. What discipline it went through. Baba did work through the horse too. From that time, the horse served us by pulling the tonga. That was the period when Kaka would go ahead of us in the tonga while we walked. He would get down at the town where Baba wanted next to halt and get out the things to have them ready when we arrived. Baba and the companions remained in Moradabad for a week while accommodations were readied near Dehradun. One morning around 10 o'clock, he told the women he would show them the town. With Baidul accompanying them, they took a long walk into the city. The sun was shining and a cold, crisp breeze blew. Baba was wearing a warm scarf and the women wore slacks. Baba and Baidul walked ahead. The four women followed. Down the dirt road, across the railway overbridge, and through the station. No platform tickets were required. Moradabad was a pleasant place then, not too congested. The foothills of the Himalayas are visible in the distance. In one lane were rows of shops where workers hammered out brass utensils, for which the town is famous. Since people did not know Meher Baba in this area, he was free to walk on the streets without being recognized. According to Mehra, however, Baba seemed to know where he was going, for he unerringly found a must crouched in a dark corner of the veranda of an old bungalow. Baba told the women to walk ahead while he contacted him. The women walked slowly, and after a few minutes, Baba joined them. They walked to a busier part of town, down a pleasant open road, lined with gardens and office buildings. It was becoming late, and they had walked far from home. Cycle rickshaws plied the streets, and Baba was in the mood to ride in one. He and Mehra climbed in one, Mani and Meru boarded another. Goher and Baidul hailed a third. The road was broad and uncongested by traffic, and on the way home, either Mani's or Goher's cycle rickshawalas started to race Baba's rickshaw. His man, too, started pedaling faster and faster. Mehra was afraid that they would topple over, but by the time they reached the railway station, her and Baba's rickshaw had won. In that way, we reached home very quickly, Mehra observed. Baba must have put it into their heads to race. He liked the fun of it. On the morning of 1 January 1950, the date Baba had repeatedly stressed would mark the end of his forgiving the companions any mistakes they made, and the beginning of the new life in earnest, Baba came to the women carrying a plate with pieces of cake brought by Harjiwan Lal's son. Baba gave a piece to Mehra first, and then to the other women, as Mani repeated to each, and also to herself, Happy New Life. And we'll stop here at the bottom of page 476.